So Maureen's showing off her candle. You're welcome to show off, kind of show and tell, retreat center show and tell. But I just want to light my candle and start this gathering, as we have 16 wonderful people with us. I invite you to do the same and center yourself in this space. Good to see everyone. I see a couple new faces. My name's Justine Johnson. I'm the Associate Director at Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center, and I've offered support to Ben and the Retreat Center collaboration through COVID. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself if there are new people here?
I'm Ben Scott-Brandt. I'm the coordinator for the Retreat Center collaboration. The only newish face I see is my friend Jonathan, who works at Gilchrist. And so Jonathan and I have spent some time pulling logs around the Gilchrist property, building a berm for branches. I remember that day so clearly. We used a tractor to do jobs that I had never seen before. So that's the person that I see that's new. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi. Can't find my candle.
Welcome. Great. Got most of our candles ready. The other thing that I did, which is kind of unique to our community calls that are on the second and fourth Tuesdays, is invited you to do a little homework ahead of this in land acknowledgements for Indigenous to America territories. That may be new for some of you, and it may not be. I just had a program on Indigenous Peoples Day in the US, inviting Kirkridge community members to do that, and most hadn't. And while land acknowledgements are important, it's just one of the first steps we can take into right relationship with Indigenous or Native American communities. That's very true for Kirkridge, as we are on ancestral land of the Lenni Lenape. We honor them in small ways by recognition in our retreat center buildings, but we also have a long way to go. I'm just sharing that as a learning curve for myself, as I do not identify as Indigenous or Native American, so I have a long way to go in my allyhood. And I think we all do as retreat centers, as organizers, as just humans in this world. So what I'd like you to do is either utilize the chat and say what ancestral lands your retreat center or you are located on, or you're welcome to speak into this circle. Maureen, ahead of our program, said it was a really fascinating adventure for her. So I'm just inviting that in as part of our opening conversation.
I mentioned to Justine and Ben, I was on a little early, that I found out I was on the Tocobaga, and I knew Seminole because in Tampa there's Seminole Hard Rock Casino, which a lot of people love. I've never been to it, but the Seminole people have many different things right here in Florida, especially down around Miami. They have their headquarters. But we also have a couple places. One I want to visit in St. Petersburg that has some of the ruins. And I know in one of the parks where we hiked, my husband and I, they had just a kind of a monument to some of the things that they had found, the artifacts. So I'm like you, Justine, I don't have those roots, although my sister does think maybe we do way back, but we haven't traced that. So
thanks, Maureen. Anyone else?
I'm in Niskayuna, New York, and we are on the land of the Haudenosaunee, which is the Mohawk. We're about 40 minutes away from Kateri Tekakwitha's birthplace. And so a few years ago, we put a peace pole. We created a peace garden and put a peace pole in, and we used on the four sides 3 languages of the Sisters of the Congregation, so English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And on the 4th, we have the message in Mohawk.
beautiful.
Wonderful, Sue, thank you.
Here in Cleveland, we're on the land of the ancestral land of the Erie tribe, the Erie people. I don't know that we've done anything specifically to recognize them yet. I've only been here. And as you may be aware, there's lots of discussions about the name of the baseball team here as we look in terms of how we regard and respect our Indigenous peoples here in the United States. But we are on the land of the Erie peoples.
Thank you, Bill.
Commonweal is on coastal Miwok land. And I often struggle with this ritual that a lot of white people have adopted about acknowledging the land, because acknowledging the land without acknowledging the tragedy is always feels a little awkward. So I struggle with how do we say it. I can share kind of the land acknowledgement I wrote for Commonweal, but just saying it without saying we also wiped out their traditions and we don't know what the ritual is feels a little disingenuous. So finding that balance is really, it's a hard one. It's a deep soul seeking, the real hard work.
Oren, thank you for that. I think that's incredibly true. So Kirkridge has a land acknowledgement as well, just like Oren had shared that sometimes land acknowledgements are given ahead of programs. And naming, right? Not just the ancestral land, but what settlers, colonizers, and white people have done is really important in that. And again, that acknowledgements are important, right? You name and notice. And then what do you do with that? And how does that move for the reconciliation? I think is the important part. In planning for Indigenous Peoples Day, that was a lot of the critical feedback is like, that's great. That's like one stop, and you just don't stop there. You have to continue coming into right relationship. Thank you, Oren, for that. And I invite any of that feedback that will help kind of dig deeper into this conversation. So again, thank you, Oren.
Another thing that this is Francisco from Pendle Hill, and we are on the ancestral land of Lenni Lenape here in Pennsylvania. And I want to add to what Justine and Oren said, that as part of our commitment to naming and recognizing the land that we are in, we also has made the decision to, long time ago, incorporate a programmatic approach to educate ourselves and educate others about this issue. And just a few weeks ago, we finished a 3-month series of webinar where most of the facilitators, if not 100% of them, were Indigenous, as we go forward in how to establish right relationship with Indigenous communities. And you know, each one of us is learning at its own page, but I think that it's important to bring all of these into the conversation.
Francisco, well, my name's Jean Richardson. I'm also at Kirkridge and also on the Lenni Lenape territories, which runs all the way down like the Delaware. So it goes New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. But Francisco, I actually met someone whose ancestral tribe was Lenni Lenape at Kirkridge from Pendle Hill. And it was really nice to engage in a conversation with him and his wife. So.
Look, yes, he came. Put the letter together. I approached leadership, got it approved.
See, Oren in the chat shared what he had shared in one of the last programs. This also might be a good conversation to have now or offline in Mighty Networks of not only sharing their land acknowledgements, but how do we move forward from that into, as Francisco said, right relationship. Anyone else would like to share? I see Marta will share on Mighty Network, so I appreciate that, and using that platform as kind of this living library that we talked about where we can put resources like this. I think Oren also challenged us to dig a little deeper as I was thinking about Thanksgiving in the US, and now Friendsgiving, and now what Ben and I named today of Retreatsgiving. I am not one who necessarily celebrates Thanksgiving, but I know a lot of people find joy in it, connection, and it's a good reminder for gratitude, although I would challenge all of us to think of things we're grateful for every day. I was reading an interesting piece that said, you can call Thanksgiving Friendsgiving, but you're still not naming the fallacies, the historical fallacies. You're not naming the awful tragedies or the colonialist and settler mindset that brought us to this day. And with that, I use a lot of resources like Seeding Sovereignty, which I can send along as I continue my knowledge sharing and learning. Had said also Indigenous and Native Americans are also not a monolith, where some do celebrate Thanksgiving. Some find joy and connection, as many white people or BIPOC communities, and some treat it as a day of mourning. So I think it's important to name that, honor that, and see how we can incorporate all of these diverse and lived experiences, even if you do honor Thanksgiving. I was saying to Ben that maybe several people are taking time for themselves this week and not on this call. And how are they honoring the history and also finding joy in the world? I know a lot of people are really looking to Thanksgiving for a little glimmer of hope in a weird and awful 2020. So just naming all of those things. And how are we grateful? I think that'll be really interesting as we move forward in this conversation. If anyone wants to add any part of that conversation, I welcome it, as again, I'm just a pilgrim in this conversation as someone who's walking with you in this. So Benner, how are we doing? We're still good for time?
I think we're doing great on time. I am available to help you with the Jamboard exercise if you want me to, so just let me know.
Ben, you're so wonderful. So one of the things, I'm grateful for Ben. There's my gratitude statement. I think Ben is awesome at holding all of us in the Retreat Center collaboration. One of the things we thought we might do, if this is a season of difficulty and you aren't finding much to be grateful for, we thought we'd share what we are grateful for. Or perhaps you are thankful for a lot of things. So we're inviting you to do this collective Jamboard. Ben, could you send the link in the chat? I'm unsure if you're familiar with Jamboard, so I'll just do a mini tutorial and Ben and I can help you. But kind of, again, grounding us in what has been unexpected in 2020. What are we looking to that is giving us hope? What do we see in our everyday lives that we are grateful for? So Ben just plopped a link in the chat. So please click on that. You'll see this whiteboard come up with a question on the top left. And I put my example on the bottom right by using a Post-it, which you would find on the left side of the whiteboard, where there's a mouse, a little image, a text box. Under the mouse icon on your left side, there's a little sticky note. I welcome you to click that and add as many things as you are hopeful for. What you do is pop that open. I'm going to walk through it so I get this right. Type whatever you'd like to type and save. And then you're welcome to repeat that, or you can click cancel if you only wanted to add one thing. Again, this is optional. I'm just going to give you about 2 minutes to populate this board, and then we can spend some time in it as a community. You all are populating it way quicker than I thought you would. Ben, is that the same for you?
This is super fun to watch. This is great.
I'll just give you about 30 more seconds. So I invite you just to read other people's comments, and if there's one that really resonates with you, I invite you to unmute and share it with everyone else.
I think some days I have to work to remember what I'm grateful for, and this is a really good sort of kickstart. There's a lot more there.
Thanks. All of you are being so quiet all of a sudden, but there's so many musics. So what are your songs of choice these days? Margarita will sing them if you name them.
Two pieces that really have hit me a lot are Carrie Newcomer's You Can Do This Hard Thing. Her collective music choir that she did for that was just really very striking. And the other one, which is a bit more, both caring and but also with a touch of humor, is the Keep Going song, or Keep Going On song. I don't know if you all have seen that. I can put links to that in the chat. It's really good.
Please, Bill, we'd love that if you would, and we'll save Margarita from singing it then.
If you haven't heard The Hope Machine by the Okie Dokie Brothers, that's a wonderful one to keep playing every once in a while. And Bill, I was going to think you would mention the one you used at Liturgy, the America the Beautiful. Who were those artists? It's so wonderful. It's a whole...
Yeah, I didn't look up. I wasn't the one who picked it. I just happened to be the one who plays the technology for church. So I have that in my list though.
But it's
I'll do that one. That was really good. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a beautiful one too.
I do have a guitar that I can bring out if you'd like me to. And Ben is the one who sings, not me.
I have a guitar nearby here too somewhere.
Oh, another one I forgot that our new president-elect likes, and that is On Eagle's Wings. And the person who wrote it was told about the fact that the president-elect mentioned it in his acceptance speech that night, but I had heard before that that's his favorite song, On Eagle's Wings.
Thanks, Maureen. Anyone else about something that resonates with them off the Jamboard, or you're welcome to share what you are grateful for, but voice to that.
Well, I saw somebody that had put time away from the screen. And while I really do appreciate the fact that there's been so many creative ways that my family and friends have come up with for us to stay connected, I do find that I really need time away from the screen also. So walks out in nature have been such a saving grace for me this year. I mean, I love walking in nature anyway, but I just feel like I've been just so much more attuned with all my senses when I'm out walking in nature these days. And it just helps me so much.
I echo you, Carrie. Being out in nature, digging in the garden, digging in the dirt, and also the expressive arts practices that, much as I'd rather be doing them in person with people, there have been some wonderful creative offerings online, and just that combination of music, movement, and writing and art I've found has been really uplifting to carry me through other things.
I do a little daily reading from a book called Anchors for the Soul, and it was on gratitude today. But I loved it that it said also pay attention to the bite-sized pieces in our lives, not just the big ones we're grateful for. And I tried to think of that today a little more, what the bite-sized ones are.
Maureen, do you have a example of a bite size?
Well, I have this wonderful man who helps me with my house cleaning and handyman, and he was just here, and I found out yesterday was his 59th birthday. So that was a little bite-sized ability to find a beautiful birthday blessing and give it to him to take home to his family. And I also, I'm part of a 100 Women Who Care group here in this area, and they're all over the country, and they meet like quarterly and then give a donation to the group that's chosen for that evening. And last Tuesday night, we found a new one that I didn't know about called the Pineapple Projects. And it's just here in Pinellas County, but I was able to nominate Danny and his family who've been living in a shelter for the last 7 months and are now in housing. And what they do is come in and like redesign and bring things that people donate. It's just a wonderful charity. So I was excited to fill out that long form today, but it was bite-sized gratitude for maybe they'll get nominated and be the ones to get this wonderful thing this project is doing.
I think I didn't write this, or maybe I kind of wrote it, but I'm grateful for this opportunity, for these times together. And as new faces show up and those that kind of come on every time we have the call, there's just a sense of community and connection that I feel right away when I turn on this Zoom time with the Retreat Center collaboration. So that I'm really just sitting in gratitude for. And those who come into the calls with hats on, because I'm a big hat lover. And so I see Sally and Jonathan with a nice hat thinking, cool, this is good. Keeping our heads warm and keeping our bodies warm through that. So it's kind of fun to see that.
Thanks, Margarita. I think we'll have to think about how we can use this Jam board as Ben said, as reminders of taking moments to pause and be grateful for what we have or what the possibilities are, even if they are bite-sized possibilities. And as we look into our near future, you know, many of you wrote being outside. Some of you wrote being with family, and that may happen in the coming days, and it may not for some. I think that's a very possible reality for us in the US and North America at large if we go back into lockdown. And we know that finding gratitude can be even more difficult in the winter or when we are experiencing a global pandemic. I had also invited, and this doesn't mean we need to transition yet, also invited you to think about a fall harvest or a community building activity. Not necessarily specific to Thanksgiving, but I think Ben may have something to share about Thanksgiving. How do we keep our spirits up when we think about turning inward and turning into winter? So I think if no one else has comments, I would invite Ben to share a little bit too and kind of set us up in the next activity.
Yeah, I'm curious if folks have more that they want to share. I do have something that I can, an exciting little tidbit that I can share that might get us going further, but do folks have other things they want to share before we move into that?
At the risk of talking too much, if you know the website gratefulness.org, they send a little daily quote from all the world religions and faiths of any kind about gratefulness. But it was started by a brother who's now in his 90s, a Catholic brother, and he was wise enough to get some techies involved with him. And now you can get greeting cards there. You can light a candle for people. It just has lots of different options. I see several of you nodding your heads, so you know it already, but I just wanted to mention that one as a wonderful tool for keeping grateful every day.
And his brother David's Grateful Day video is just, I watch it at least once a month, and it always brings tears to my eyes.
It's really good.
I'm just reminded of one more thing that's really been such a moment of gratitude for me. I have a friend who's really struggling. She has cancer. And when I talk to her on the phone, she laughs a lot. And this week we were talking about that because as she was laughing, it just sounded like diamonds. And I told her that. And she just laughed even more. And we just shared a moment of thinking about how laughter has been such a gift over the past month. And really being aware of noticing smiles and laughter with people has just felt so nourishing.
I was on a wonderful workshop yesterday, a theater workshop led by someone who's in Jenin, Palestine. And I can't remember the exact quote, but I think it was Orson Welles, and I think it was, I'll have to get it and I'll send it. Comedy is or every bit of comedy is a little revolution. And so we discussed that and how laughter and joy, just even bringing joy into the world, is a resistance against the negativity. And so I've been thinking a lot about that quote. I'll find it and put it in the chat, and the gratitude for laughter.
And now that I've moved to northern Vermont, I am grateful for internet. And I realize how precarious it can be. And right now, I have not been able to do a gallery view, so I can't see everybody's faces. And it's really driving me nuts. But I am still grateful for Zoom and to be on this call with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty. We hear you and we see you, even if you can't see us. Some good resources coming into the chat box there too. The resource that I wanted to share is something that happens in my community every year around Thanksgiving. It's an interfaith gathering specifically about Thanksgiving. And I missed it. It was last night. But I had been thinking about it for a while, like that's gotta be coming up soon. And it has been going for 20 years. a little larger every time. I attended last year. It was at the large cathedral downtown. I brought my family. I felt a little out of place, and then I was just blown away. So many people, so many songs, so many dances, so many stories. It was a beautiful gathering that is so out of character for us in America right now, that we're all going to just get together with all our differences and share in this community way. It was beautiful. And so I've been thinking about that some as we approach Thanksgiving this year, and remembering sitting in that pew with all these faces from my community, faces of people that I don't know, that I rarely, if ever, interact with. And because of my interfaith organizing background, I was a part of that community and a part of bringing those people together. And it was so powerful to me. So I feel like many of you are in positions to do similar things, or maybe have already. And I know that Margarita and Dominican Center have held many events similar to that. But I wanted to share the website. This is the college that I graduated from, Grand Valley State University. But that shows a little of the history, and it goes back year after year, and you see pictures. You see it kind of getting smaller back, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Really a cool event. So I'm curious if folks have done something like that in their communities. There's obviously some tension there. What does the holiday mean to different communities? How is it interpreted differently? How are people holding it as a source of pain instead of as a source of celebration? There's some sobering reality there. But to be able to hold all that at the same time and be in the space with each other and communicating and learning about the different ways people are looking at it was really a beautiful experience.
Another resource that I'd like to offer, and I don't have the exact link at the moment, but for years, Rick and I would do a Thanksgiving potluck for anybody who didn't have another place to go back in Tucson. And then when we came to Stony Point Center, we just kept that going. And then our Native American friends kind of took it over with our blessing and our support. And they turned it into a meal that invited Native American elders to come and to do storytelling and teaching and song. And they decided on the name early on, Our Big Fat Native American Thanksgiving. But I think that is being changed, so I'm kind of glad about that. And this year they're doing it virtually from 2 to 4 p.m. on Thanksgiving afternoon, this Thursday afternoon. Although I wouldn't be so sure about the ending time. Definitely starting around 2, but it could go on for a while. And unfortunately, I don't have the link at my fingertips, but I think it will be streamed live from Facebook, and it's being sponsored not by Stony Point Center this year, but by the Sweetwater Cultural Center. And that is used to be Stony Point Presbyterian Church down the street. And the whole property was turned over to the Ramapo last year, and they had an opening celebration in September outside, and they're sponsoring it. So I'll put Sweetwater Cultural Center in the chat, and I think looking for it on Facebook would probably be your best bet. And if I get any more information, I'll try and get it out. But it's been wonderful. It's been a really wonderful time, and I'm glad that they are doing it, and they're doing it virtually so that more people can participate.
Thanks, Kitty. That reminded me, I wanted to share something earlier. One of our fellow retreat centers, Beacon Hill, in their newsletter this morning had sent out what they did, which I'll send the YouTube link of the recording, but it was looking deeply at Thanksgiving. So they were going to be invited to consider difficult truths about Thanksgiving, reflect with others, and hear some messages of hope that's built on justice and right relationship. So I'll put that in the link.
just to piggyback briefly off of Marta and Justine's comments there about rest as resistance a little while ago. In case you don't know about this, the NAP ministry actually uses that language, and I love that. So I'm just sharing that link as well. It fits so beautifully with some of our work, and so it's been on my radar for a while now, and Justine just reminded me again.
You know, I listened to the invitation, Ben, that you said, how are we finding ways to create or the space for the divisiveness to come together or to break down the barriers. I mean, it's not exactly what you said, but that's what I heard the invitation of. And I think about that, especially as we close the year. How do we ask the question about, do you care what I care about? How do we find that connection of commonality that gets to the core of who we are in a very spiritual sense? And I'm finding just personally, I need that, that do you care what I care about? Don't tell me about the injustices of it right now, because I can't handle it anymore. But do you care what I care about? And can I start from there? And that's just a personal piece where I'm at right now. It's not where I usually stand. But I get, I think in this time, we all get why people come to us, why they come to retreat centers and why they are so needed for our own spiritual well-being or for our own next step, to take that next step. Don't stop. Keep taking one step in front of the other. And I think in many ways, it's such an awakening of our role as retreat centers. And how do we keep that work going? And even in through the challenges of the pandemic. And how do we start with that? Do you care what I care about? Invitation to the communities that find themselves in different polarizations, in different territories to come together. I don't know why I offer that, but we're thinking about doing something like that in the Promptu program here in December. And just kind of invite the community to say, hey, what do you care about? Because probably we care about the same thing. And let's close the year caring about each other.
Other folks have recipes for connection, recipes for building community that they use this time of year or that they've seen kind of showing up lately. Those could be physical recipes or metaphorical recipes.
One thing that I can share is that, as a small retreat center that has lost half of its staff, with the remaining people, one point of connection that I have found is to invite them to not just look at the moment that we are going through, but to think, if there is an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, how do you see yourself on that picture? And people are very generous and creative, and it's interesting, the things that they can come out with. So I think that just doing this exercise, including the technology that we are using these days, has been a real blessing. Posting those questions that can be very simple but very deep, and invite people to think outside of the anxiety that they are living today is it's an invitation to, yes, this community can be rebuilt, and we can contribute to it and be part of it in a way that we never envisioned before.
I love that question, Francisco, and Kitty's like affirmation of it in the chat, which made me smile. Don't let a pandemic go to waste. And then I think about Oren, who talks about unexpected outcomes. What are the unexpected outcomes of this pandemic? And that's something we haven't really revisited as a RCC in a bit. We talked about it in April, maybe. But what are those unexpected outcomes? And I think that loops really nicely back into what are we grateful for? Where can we see the bright spots of this pandemic?
Francisco, I also want to lift up this sense of it's an opportunity for reinvention. And, and I'm aware that for some retreat centers, that's not going to be possible at all in the same way that they ever imagined. But how it is we're called to support each other in some type of reinvention, and imagining that as a collective, we're much stronger together, and it's not that we're all just these individual centers. How is it that we could do some collaboration online? How is it that we could continue to care about the things we care about and be strengthened? One of the things that we've noticed over the history of the RCC is we started out in this very strange place of competition and people being scared to share who they were. And one of the things that COVID did was immediately brought us into, we're in this boat together and we're going to share everything we know how so that we can all kind of make it safely to the shore. And I would really welcome a conversation like that, because the world continues to move forward. And I think there is a great opportunity for reinvention and reimagining who we are as centers and as movement makers in this world, and how it is we work together.
To reflect on what Jean is saying, to take that, it's not only how we invent, but how do we hold on to that? Because I have this deep fear that the vaccines are going to come out and there's going to be a major push that's actually going to bring the right and the left and the blues and the reds all together to save the American economy, to go back to how things used to be. And all this reflection and reinvention opportunity might get lost in that push to go back to how things used to be. And I wonder, how do we hold on to these learnings? How do we integrate some of these new things? And I think this forum is an example. The fact that now Zoom brings people together, and there are people on Zoom that I wouldn't have expected to find myself on Zoom as much. That's one thing that I think is here to stay, but I hope it goes beyond that.
What I hope is that there's more recognition of how we're dependent on each other. And I mean that in the largest sense, that someone who doesn't have health care is a threat to someone who does, because they might be carrying, I feel like that's just not lifted up enough, that there should be a recognition now that everybody needs health care, that's a no-brainer, because even the richest people can't protect themselves from people who don't have the health care that they deserve and have a right to, and they're infected by the virus. I just wish that was lifted up more with this virus, that this should be one of the lessons that we all get from it, is that everybody has to have a health care, and that we are all dependent upon each other. I don't know, it's more frustrating.
Oh, Kitty, just to follow up on that, and then I'll be quiet. I mean, one of the things I've dreamed about in being part of this collaboration is that retreat centers that couldn't afford healthcare for its staff could come together as a collective, and therefore be able to afford healthcare, because I know for Kirkridge, we were just about put out of business with trying to pay full healthcare for people, and because of the sheer expense. But had we been in a larger pool, that might have been something that was a real tangible thing that we could do to benefit our staff and those who work with us, so that everyone is treated fairly and come together in some health collective pool. Just a thought. Or quite frankly, be picked up by somebody else who's in a larger one already, and be kind of assumed in. Right? That would have been really helpful too.
We probably talked a lot about making it possible for people who cannot physically get to our retreat centers anymore, but can do it on this environment. But we know that a lot of our virtual schooling, there's many, I forget what the number was in New York City, of children who don't even have the equipment to be able to be part of the virtual learning. So we're just going to have these big learning gaps again, unless we find some way to do something about the lack of the devices that make this possible. Or a lot of my friends who are also octogenarians don't even want to think about learning Zoom. It just frightens them. But I think trying to help people into this environment as a possibility for keeping away the isolation and the depression and so much of what we can have to offer that can help people through this time.
Two weeks ago, we opened our community call with the question about, is there a need for a community call on what retreat centers' role in bridging divides or creating a more just world in our current landscape looks like? There wasn't really a peak of interest. No one readily said, yes, I'll help facilitate that. But I'm asking that question again because of all the questions without answers, and we don't have to have answers, but all of the questions you all just laid out of, who do we want to be individually and collectively? How do we hold on to what we learn? How do we come together through divisiveness? And maybe that's the start of a conversation here today, but it's also making me, as kind of the behind the scenes person, think about how do we weave those threads into next year's conversations. And I'm looking to you for advice or insights on that.
You've started us on it very well with the Jedi. We had 2 sessions with that I thought was so powerful. But I think you're right. It's still a question of how do we really practically implement some of these ideas. And, even the people that have been in my White Fragility book club or in the racism conversations, they're all saying, but what do I do really? How can I practically make a difference? And what we've been saying about the Indigenous people today, it's the same thing. So many of our people that need ways that those of us that are privileged white people can figure out what to do next.
Justine, I really appreciate you bringing that up, and I actually would love a longer conversation that we really have a time to invite ideas and thoughts about ways that we might do collaboration, especially while we could plant those seeds while we're all still online. I mean, there's no reason that we couldn't have a joint program together with some major speaker that we all invite our communities to, and then take, break that out, into either our own communities book groups or a variety of forums. And we do have some money within the RCC for the next couple years that I know the steering committee is looking for ideas and suggestions of how we might move forward. So having a conversation within the community call would be really helpful as we move around the bend into the next year.
Justine, I didn't understand really what you would need to feel supported in that request.
I'm just looking for your sage wisdom in this conversation. How do we hold this space? How do we ask the questions and maybe get to answers, maybe not? And Maureen, I'm glad you said Jedi, because we are working on that. And so it's just really to know interest and need. What's the demand? What do we need to know moving forward? Or how do we support each other? Not necessarily Ben and I, but each other as we navigate 2021.
Well, one of the things that I know that we've talked about is to come together in common conversation like we're doing today, but even at a more intentional, focused kind of conversation. So, one of the things that that we could come together around, especially like at Mighty Networks, now that we have these small groups, is to invite those who want to just talk about the next 3 or 4 months and what does their program calendar look like, and what are some threads that are common between all that we're doing, and or some areas in which we can come together to support little small collaboration projects. We're not looking for the magic collaboration project, but something that we can come together and share that conversation. Some talked about coming together as those who are in charge of operations of retreat centers, to come together about how to have a common dialogue just on that topic alone. Where these community calls, I think, are wonderful, but it's all of us having the same call, but coming in from different angles. And so I wonder if there's some value within our Mighty Networks to come together around certain focused conversations for just 2 or 3 times together to see what we could share and learn from each other. I think just opening it up as you did, Justine, about how to recognize the land in which we are sitting on and standing on, or our retreat centers are built on. I think that itself is a good conversation to have very intentionally. What is a statement? And you do statements, and how do you put that out? Where do you put that out? And that kinds of stuff. I think those are the kind of conversations that really we can benefit from each other. So I can see some invitations around those particular topics to get that kind of momentum going. And it doesn't have to be like we meet for 10 months. It could be let's meet for 3 times and share some perspective kind of thing.
So quite a few ideas kind of bubbling up there, Justine. I wonder if we can tease those just a little bit more to identify kind of the different topics that are at play there. I hear something that's more specifically collaborative, and I know maybe it was Jean's expression about sharing programs kind of amongst the different centers. But then I hear some other things bubbling up there too, particularly what you last said there about healing division or gathering people together. Are there some other things I'm missing in there too? And maybe we don't need to identify all of them, but I just want to make sure I'm not missing some of the things that have been said.
I want to lift up what Francisco said, which is reimagining our centers, and that real sweet spot where we're in right now, where we're not getting gravitationally pulled back to we want to open the way we used to be. The way we used to be may not be what the world's calling us to be. And I would love a conversation around that. I know we're exploring that in our own center. And that way, you know, I mean, that's a little bit self-interest, but that's the truth, you know, like we're all in this together, and it's like, you know, I need some help to think, or Justine and I, you know, need some help to think something through, and we just may all come to you and say, this is what we're thinking about. You know, how would you present this proposal?
I think that divisions piece is been very much on my heart, because I think of the faith community that I worship in is in many ways a silo. I think many people who cross the threshold to our retreat center are already like-minded, and you know, I think that's the reality of our world today, is our news media, from what we read and listen to, we're so siloed, and you know, we're not all listening to Walter Cronkite on the evening news together. We're, you know, we're listening to our different channels, and for me, it's, you know, how do we help bridge that gap and make that invitation? I mean, Margarita, the question you asked, do you care what I care about? I mean, that's such a wonderful invitation, but I'm even thinking, like, you know, how do I get the person that I want to ask that question to, or who wants to ask me that question? How do I even get them together? Because that's the challenge, is, you know, I feel siloed.
I oftentimes feel that way here at Gilchrist as well. I mean, and maybe it's, I guess it's a part of it is just by being someone who's trying to create a blank slate for people to come participate in whatever spiritual practice they would like to. I almost feel like it's part of my, like, designated role, or it's almost like in my job description to leave those silos up, you know, to kind of like, I don't want to meet someone in the parking lot and then, you know, cause a meltdown before they're going into like their 2 days of retreat time that they're so grateful for. So it's a part of it is kind of, you know, how much does my role involve pushing those limits, and how much does it just mean leaving those conversations at the door, because this is a retreat space. I don't know. One of the things that we talk about at Gilchrist a lot is trying to discern whether Gilchrist is a retreat center or I mean, we are a retreat center, but trying to discern like how much activism can we inject into our presence in the community and yet still remain a place where people feel comfortable to come, and ideally as many people as possible see us as that kind of safe haven. I think that's a really tricky question, and I don't have it. I don't know. I just rake leaves and go mow the lawn and say, good luck.
Jonathan, that sounds wonderful. Raking leaves, I feel, is a form of meditation. And I think those are really important questions. That when you're saying that, I also think about Sally, who's on the call. She pushes back when we say we welcome everyone. She doesn't say, no, you're not, but she says, are you sure? What if the KKK wants a retreat at your center? And I think about last week, Ben and I went to a Holistic Centers Network program where Rick Wright from Sacred Kashi also said, are you truly welcoming of everyone? You have to sit with that difficult question. And the answer may be no. You may want, it sounds really nice to say we're welcome to everyone, but are you? And what is our role in that? And how do we define welcome even? So I appreciate those questions. And sorry, Sally, to call you out. Okay.
I don't know if I don't think it's necessarily along the same line. I think it's along the same vein, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately in terms of protest. And I hope I can connect this back in. But it seems to me like especially, well, probably everywhere, but we have protests and then we have anti-protests at the same time. And that seems to like create a lot of tension. And I just wonder like, what if the most appropriate form of anti-protesting is just not paying attention, just go inside. And so I just wonder, does that kind of pattern kind of link up with that question in the retreat center, or at least at Gilchrist? It's like, if a KKK member wanted to come and write poetry or do whatever spiritual practice they wanted to do, like, and they wanted to talk to me about being KKK, like, I would just not pay, I would just say, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested, and you'll have to find someone else. I don't know, I just like, is there like a peaceful way to not fuel that fire on a societal level, but also like, does that fit in somehow with being that retreat center space of being inviting, but maybe not inclusive? I don't know, like, I want to invite you, but I'm not including you. I don't want to be included in that thing. I don't know. That might be too swirly. I don't know if it came out, but, and there's a knock on the door.
I wonder sometimes when we think that those that come to the center are very like-minded, I wonder if that's really true. And well, I think we think in this country many ways polarization, I'm over here, I'm over there, and how do we get these over there and those over there together at our retreat center? But I know in many programs that I facilitated where I really thought, oh, these are all like-minded individuals. And as we dug deeper and we got in deeper and we got in deeper, then that fantasy of being like-minded kind of really was blown out of the water, quite honestly. And so I get what people are saying, and at the same time, I know that, it's like that phrase that goes, we're preaching to the choir, but sometimes the choir needs preaching too. And how do we recognize that is part of the work? I'm not excusing that we don't have to be out there doing the outreach. Don't get me wrong. We got a long way to go in that inclusion definition. But yeah, I think that there is some of that happens in our spaces that perhaps, I mean, there's just a lot of differences. Yeah, I don't know what like-minded means anymore.
Thanks, Margarita and Jonathan. I love wading through the murkiness with all of you. It makes me feel like we aren't in silos. We're not just the only ones asking these questions. And I'd be curious to hear other people's responses, especially those. I'm going to do a teacher thing. Those who have been quiet the last hour, I'd invite you in to provide your opinion or perspective.
I can add that we haven't gone really out there in terms of activism, but our congregation created these signs that say racism is a sin, period. Dominican Sisters of Peace. So we put the signs on the property at the entrances, and a couple of them disappeared. So I put more signs out, and a few more disappeared. And other calls, we had people call and say, where can I get that? That is the one sign that I would put in front of my house. And we're kind of on a corner. We're next to a Jewish synagogue, and we're across the street from a Sikh temple. And it's some of our Jewish neighbors who are saying, I want one of those, want one of those. So that was sort of fascinating. And then I had my first call of somebody saying, who do you think you are? How can you be putting me down? And just really listened and said, not putting you down, just making a statement that I need to take into consideration for myself as well. And my aunt goes there, and I'm sure she donates there. My mother goes there, and I'm going to tell people never to come to your place again. And all I could say was, I'm really sorry you feel that way. And just listened, and a couple times said, just really sorry you feel that way. And at the end, she says, well, I'm still not going to come there, but thank you for listening to me. So I thought, if all I did was hear her point of view, then maybe that made a difference to her somewhere along the line. But anyway, that's my most recent experience of dealing with some of what's happening in our world. In addition to one of the things that I started, and this is sort of irrelevant to some of what we've been talking about, but maybe touches on the beginning at the little bit, is when the COVID started around, I just started putting out what I called thoughts on prayer. And it was different ways of praying in the midst of it, encouraging people to walk outside, this month was on gratitude. And it is amazing to me that given the limited number of people that have been able to come back to the retreat center, the people that we're having retreats online, but how many people have taken that Saturday reflection of 3 paragraphs and have passed it on to somebody else, have passed it on to churches, have passed it on to friends, and clearly that's one of the things that when this is all over, I have to keep doing, because they're looking for that. But I think it does give a word of hope in the midst of difficult life for a lot of people. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I find myself thinking as I'm listening to this whole conversation, first of all, how grateful I am to be with people who are willing to have talks about messy things. And I'm thinking a lot about this book, which is written by one of our faculty members at Kirkridge, The Space Between Church and Not Church by Caroline Fearless. And I'm thinking about what would it look like if we talked about the space between retreat centers and not retreat centers. Because I feel like that's really the gift of this time, that we have the chance to explore that. I heard, Jean, you say that, we not only don't want to return to normal, whatever that was, but we're not clear about what's needed. And yet we want to move forward with intention, even if it's with some unknowing. And I'm grateful to be able to be with people that I can explore the space between retreat centers and not retreat centers.
I'll just say briefly that I came to this work out of questions very similar to that you're posing there, Sally. What happens in that space between? My degree, my undergraduate degree, I was able to choose an interdisciplinary major, and I chose sacred space, both inside and outside religion. And I'm very curious about those places in our society and in our culture that give us that inner strength and that inner fortitude to be present in the world and do the difficult work that we have to do in the world. I mean, as Fetzer's byline, the spiritual foundation for a loving world. And I think retreat centers are an amazing example of that. And in this year, as we've gone through this tumult, there's still such a role to play. And there's such a role to play even now in that gray area right outside retreat centers. Where are all those connection points that are being revealed in this virtual space? What other connection points are possible there? I just love that question. That resonates deeply with me.
I think, you know, from our experience, you know, I just realized, Justine, you asked for people who aren't speaking to speak, so I can stop if you want to.
Love it. No.
Okay. That in our experience, you know, if you really want to test whether or not a retreat center is a retreat center without a retreat center, welcome to my world. And what it does test is the ability to take the essence of what we do and then go to the community to see if the community then can do it outside of that space. And it's a real interesting capacity that we're really looking internally about how do we do that and take what we do on the road, which means onto the community. And it's a forced way of doing that, but it does force you into the community to do so, using the same teachings and methodologies, but perhaps not the beautiful 34 acres of land of where people came to. So there's a lot of learnings in that as well.
Ben, I think with our 10 minutes left, anyone's invited to speak, and we don't have to go until 3 p.m. Eastern time, you know, whenever this feels good, we can end. But I also want to go back to your original question about recipes in community building.
Sure.
And I just wanted to share a story about one thing I'm grateful for, which is Kirkridge, where I work and live. And Jean's partner, Pat, had taught my partner and I how to make bread, and they're master bread makers. So if you ever come to Kirkridge, you're going to love the bread they make. And then in January, one of our last retreats, my partner and I hosted a self-care retreat where we made this no-knead bread. And it was such a beautiful coming together over food and at the kitchen table. And it brought so much joy, and it's part of my self-care plan that I carry with me. So I was just going to share that recipe. It also is very reminiscent of my grandmother who's passed. She was Norwegian, and we would make lefse every Thanksgiving. So as I said in the beginning, I don't recognize or celebrate or do anything for Thanksgiving. We'll probably order Chinese food. But I do carry those traditions with me. And so it reminds me of that reimagining. What are we holding on to that we can celebrate and honor? And what have we let go of and have been okay with that letting go process? So I'm just going to share a recipe too. A little good feel me good thing stuff going on here.
Justine, you and my minds are the same. I actually took a photo of that to share today. So this is the easiest bread recipe in the world, and it's so freaking delicious. And the only add I would do is put a cup of whole wheat flour in it. But anyway, I just made a loaf this morning. So great minds think alike, Justine.
And you're sending it to everyone on this call, right? I think Paul started that conversation at the beginning.
I actually sent it to you. I sent it to you. I took a photo of it.
Oh, I meant the actual bread, Jean. I see Bill's nodding his head. You'd like some bread, right, Bill? Yeah.
Oh, the actual bread? Yeah. You know, that's going to be the next reincarnation of Zoom, is we're just going to be able to pass things through the screen. I mean, who would have dreamed this, especially people my age? But anyway, I really highly recommend this.
I think that would be fine to be able to pass bread through Zoom, as long as you could smell it first as well, because that's, I think, one of the most wonderful things about bread, especially on a day like today. Here in Wisconsin, it's cold and snowy and rainy, and to have the smell of bread filling a room on a day like today would just be, it's as delicious as the taste itself, is the aroma.
Well, since I just made it, I'm going to go run and get it and show it to you.
Anyone else? I'm going to fill up some space until you think of a recipe. But Toby, outside of Madison, do you have lefse? Because I can't find it in Pennsylvania. So hopefully.
I would say that here at Pendle Hill, this is one of the distinctive things that we do. Usually the bread that we serve here is baked that day. And as the kitchen is closed, oh, look at that, this is beautiful. As the kitchen is closed, the few staff that are here, to maintain our sense of community, we are eating together on Thursday. So our chef, that is now chef and gardener, she bring back that tradition, and usually on Thursday we are having fresh bread. But I also started investing some time in sourdough bread, and basically every week I found myself baking a couple loads, not just for the community but also for myself. Yeah.
Jean, let's see that bread. Wow. How long does it last in your household?
I wish it lasted longer. But I probably make it twice a week, and Francisco, I actually do put sourdough in it. It's fab.
Justine, I didn't know what lefse was, so I looked it up. And
Yes.
it reminds me a lot of injera, the Ethiopian flatbread.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that suddenly flashed me back to eating Ethiopian in a circle with many other people, all of us with our hands right in the middle of the platter, scooping up our meal and eating together. That feels like another century. I just can't even imagine how that must feel now after COVID to eat that way together. What a beautiful thing.
We might have to do a bread making or meal sharing community call, I think. We've come alive thinking about bread. And I also think it's a good way to end the call, as you all kind of nod and say yes. Or maybe not end the call, but taking it to a different platform. And Ben and I, of course, have always been saying this since we launched Mighty Networks, but we're inviting this conversation to continue on Mighty Networks. Share recipes, share end of year programming, share land acknowledgement statements and action items associated with that. We'll have one more community call in 2020, and we'll kind of close out the year, and then we'll look forward to 2021. But as I said in the call, Ben and I would love your insights, for you to volunteer as a facilitator, hear what you are struggling with and how we can support you. And I'm just so grateful for all of you and your engagement in today's call. Ben, do you want to add any final note?
I was going to put in the chat the link to the retreat resources topic in Mighty Networks. I think that'd be a great spot for recipes. When we were first talking about developing the digital resource library, recipes came up quite a bit in our discussions back in January and February. They didn't seem as important once we got into COVID, but they still are. They certainly are. So if you're thinking of sharing bread, that bread recipe, that might be a good place to put it so we can enjoy that together.
And I'll put all the resources listed in the chat in our notes that Ben sends out on a blog post so we can look back to that. Thank you, everyone. Be well, and I'm going to blow out my candle. Stop recording.